England is not the largest country. It does not possess the richest natural resources. It occupies only a small part of a modest island off the coast of Europe. And yet, from these shores emerged kings who changed history, queens who ruled an empire where the sun never seemed to set, explorers who crossed unknown oceans, scientists whose discoveries transformed civilization, and a language that would one day be spoken across the globe. For centuries, England stood at the center of events that reshaped the modern world. Its armies fought legendary battles. Its ships dominated the seas. Its laws influenced governments. Its ideas inspired revolutions. And its empire grew so vast that nearly a quarter of the world's population lived under the British crown. But none of this seemed possible in the beginning. This was once a land of scattered tribes, dense forests, and muddy roads, a place repeatedly invaded by Romans, Saxons, Vikings, and Normans. Each conqueror left something behind, while changing England forever. Many kingdoms disappeared beneath the weight of war. England did not. Instead, every invasion, every civil war, every plague, and every revolution seemed to make the nation stronger than before. How did one small island become one of history's most powerful kingdoms? And how did its rise shape the world we live in today? To answer that, we must travel back nearly 2,000 years to a time when England wasn't yet England, but a distant frontier standing at the edge of the Roman world. Before we begin, take a moment to subscribe if you love remarkable true stories from history. Long before England existed, these islands were home to Celtic tribes, living in scattered settlements across forests, rivers, and rolling hills. Then, in AD 43, everything changed. The Roman Empire invaded Britain, bringing disciplined legions, stone roads, forts, cities, and a new way of life. For nearly 4 centuries, Roman rule transformed much of southern Britain, connecting it to one of the greatest empires the world had ever known. But empires do not last forever. As Rome weakened, its legions withdrew, leaving Britain vulnerable once again. Into that power vacuum came new settlers. The Anglo-Saxons and Jutes crossed the North Sea, establishing their own kingdoms across the island. Over time, these kingdoms grew, fought one another, and gradually formed the foundations of what would become England. In fact, the name England itself comes from the Angles, the land of the Angles. Just as these kingdoms began to prosper, another threat appeared. Longships emerged on the horizon. The Vikings arrived first as raiders, attacking monasteries and coastal towns with astonishing speed. But soon they came not only to plunder, but to settle. Large parts of eastern England fell under Viking control, and once again, the future of the island hung in the balance. England had survived the Romans. Now it faced a new enemy unlike any before. Could the divided Anglo-Saxon kingdoms unite before the Vikings conquered them all? For years, the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms fought to preserve their land. Under leaders like Alfred the Great, they pushed back the Vikings and gradually united much of England under a single crown. At last, it seemed the kingdom had found stability. Then, in 1066, everything changed. When King Edward the Confessor died without an heir, several powerful men claimed the English throne. The struggle for the crown quickly became one of the most decisive succession crises in European history. One claimant stood across the English Channel. William, Duke of Normandy, believed the throne had been promised to him. Refusing to accept another king, he assembled an invasion force and sailed for England. The two armies met at the Battle of Hastings. The fighting lasted from morning until dusk. King Harold II's army held its ground for hours, but William's forces gradually broke through. Harold was killed, and the English army collapsed. William had won, but this was far more than a military victory. The Norman Conquest transformed England forever. French-speaking nobles replaced the Anglo-Saxon elite. Massive stone castles rose across the countryside. A new system of government strengthened royal authority, while the English language itself absorbed thousands of Norman French words. The England that emerged after 1066 looked very different from the one that had existed before. Yet conquering a kingdom was only the beginning. William's descendants would soon face a challenge even greater than invasion. How much power should a king truly possess? After conquering England, William the Conqueror wasted no time securing his new kingdom. Across the country, enormous stone castles began to rise. They were more than military fortresses. They were symbols of Norman authority, reminding everyone who now ruled England. To strengthen his control, William ordered one of the most remarkable surveys of the medieval world. The Domesday Book recorded lands, wealth, and property across the kingdom with extraordinary detail, allowing the crown to collect taxes and govern more effectively than ever before. For generations, Norman kings expanded their power, but the stronger the monarchy became, the more resistance it faced. That conflict reached a breaking point during the reign of King John. Heavy taxes, costly wars, and failed military campaigns angered England's most powerful barons. They no longer trusted the king to rule without limits. In 1215, they forced John to meet them at Runnymede. There, he placed his seal on a document that would change history. It was called the Magna Carta. Although it was originally intended to settle a dispute between the king and his nobles, one revolutionary idea stood above the rest. Even the king was not above the law. That principle would influence constitutional government for centuries, inspiring legal systems far beyond England's shores. But England's struggles were far from over. A new royal family was about to take the throne, and one king's personal decision would divide the nation more deeply than any battle ever had. In 1485, after decades of civil war known as the Wars of the Roses, a new dynasty finally brought stability to England. The Tudors had taken the throne. Among them, no ruler would leave a greater mark than King Henry VIII. At first, Henry was a loyal Catholic king. But as the years passed, one problem overshadowed everything else. He had no surviving male heir. Believing the future of his dynasty depended on securing the succession, Henry sought permission from the Pope to annul his marriage. The request was refused. Henry faced a choice: accept the Pope's authority, or break away from the church that had guided England for centuries. He chose the second path. In the 1530s, Henry declared himself the supreme head of the Church of England, ending the authority of the Pope within his kingdom. Monasteries were dissolved, vast church lands were seized by the crown, and England entered a period of profound religious and political change. The consequences reached far beyond Henry's lifetime. His children, Edward VI, Mary I, and Elizabeth I, would each steer the nation in dramatically different religious directions. Under Elizabeth I, England found greater stability, defeated the mighty Spanish Armada, and began expanding its influence across the seas. The Tudor age transformed England forever. But beneath the growing power of the monarchy, another conflict was quietly taking shape. Soon, the question would no longer be about religion. It would be about who truly had the right to rule England, the king or parliament. By the early 17th century, England had become a nation divided. The monarchy believed that kings ruled by divine right, answering only to God. Parliament believed that even the king should be accountable to the laws and the people he governed. Neither side was willing to give way. When King Charles I repeatedly clashed with Parliament over taxes, religion, and royal authority, political tensions turned into open war. In 1642, England descended into civil war. Families found themselves fighting on opposite sides. The Royalists supported the king. The Parliamentarians, led by Oliver Cromwell, fought to limit royal power and defend Parliament's authority. After years of brutal conflict, Parliament emerged victorious. For the first time in English history, a reigning monarch was placed on trial for treason against his own people. In 1649, Charles I was executed. The execution shocked Europe. The idea that a king could be judged by his own subjects challenged centuries of tradition. England briefly became a republic under Cromwell, but the experiment proved difficult to sustain. After Cromwell's death, the monarchy was restored. Yet England had changed forever. No future king or queen could ignore Parliament as earlier monarchs had done. Over time, power shifted steadily toward constitutional government, laying the foundations for the parliamentary democracy that continues today. The struggle between king and parliament had reshaped the nation. Now England was ready for a different kind of battle, not for control of its own island, but for control of the world beyond its shores. As political stability gradually returned, England turned its attention outward. The sea became its greatest opportunity. Merchant ships carried English goods across the globe, while explorers charted new routes and established settlements in distant lands. Every successful voyage expanded England's influence, wealth, and ambition. But the oceans were fiercely contested. Spain, France, and the Netherlands were all competing for trade, territory, and naval supremacy. To survive, England needed more than skilled sailors. It needed the world's most powerful navy. Over the following centuries, the Royal Navy became the backbone of Britain's growing power, protecting trade routes and securing victories that reshaped global history. As commerce expanded, colonies spread across North America, the Caribbean, Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. The empire grew at an astonishing pace. By the 19th century, it had become the largest empire the world had ever seen. Nearly 1/4 of the Earth's land surface and population came under the British Crown. The phrase, "the empire on which the sun never sets," was no exaggeration. English law, language, education, and institutions spread across continents, leaving a legacy that still influences much of the world today. But every empire carries its own burdens. Defending such a vast realm demanded enormous wealth, military strength, and constant vigilance. And as a new century approached, England would face challenges unlike anything in its history. The battlefield was no longer a distant colony. It was the entire world. While Britain's empire expanded across the globe, another revolution was transforming life at home. The Industrial Revolution began in Britain, changing the world forever. Steam engines powered factories, railways connected cities, and new inventions accelerated production on an unprecedented scale. Britain became known as the workshop of the world, exporting goods, technology, and innovation to every continent. Its wealth and influence reached extraordinary heights. But the 20th century brought challenges that no empire could escape. In 1914, Europe descended into the First World War. Millions of British soldiers fought across battlefields stretching from France to the Middle East. The war ended in victory, but at an immense human and economic cost. Barely 2 decades later, an even greater conflict erupted. During the Second World War, Britain stood almost alone against Nazi Germany after much of Europe had fallen. The skies above England became the scene of the Battle of Britain, where Royal Air Force pilots prevented a German invasion. Cities endured relentless bombing during the Blitz, yet the nation refused to surrender. Britain emerged victorious once again, but victory came with a price. The wars had exhausted the country's economy, and maintaining a global empire became increasingly difficult. Across Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean, colonies sought independence, and one by one, they achieved it. The empire that had once spanned the globe slowly came to an end. Yet Britain's story was far from over. Without an empire, England would have to discover a new place in a rapidly changing world. As the British Empire faded, many wondered whether Britain's influence would fade with it. It did not. Instead of ruling vast territories, Britain began shaping the world in different ways. London grew into one of the world's leading financial centers, while British universities, scientific research, literature, music, and technology continued to influence millions of people across the globe. The country also faced new challenges. Economic changes reshaped traditional industries. Immigration transformed society into one of remarkable cultural diversity. Political debates over Britain's place in Europe culminated in Brexit, marking another major turning point in the nation's history. Yet, through every change, one institution remained a powerful symbol of continuity: the monarchy. From Queen Victoria to Queen Elizabeth II, and now King Charles III, the crown has remained at the center of Britain's national identity, even as political power rests with Parliament and elected governments. Today's England is a nation where medieval castles overlook modern cities. Centuries-old traditions exist alongside cutting-edge innovation, and history is woven into everyday life. Its global influence no longer depends on conquest. It lives through its language, its institutions, its culture, and its ideas. After nearly 2,000 years of invasions, revolutions, discoveries, and transformation, one final question remains. What is England's greatest legacy to the world? England's history is far more than a story of kings, queens, battles, and empire. It is the story of a nation that continually reinvented itself. Romans built its first great cities. The Anglo-Saxons gave it its name. The Normans reshaped its government. The Tudors transformed its religion. Parliament redefined the balance of power. The Industrial Revolution changed the way humanity lived and worked. And the British Empire carried English language, law, institutions, and culture to every corner of the globe. Not every chapter was one of triumph. England experienced civil wars, religious conflict, famine, colonial expansion, and the hardships that came with industrialization and global war. Its legacy, like that of every great nation, is both influential and complex. Yet few countries have shaped the modern world so profoundly. Today, English is the world's most widely used international language. Parliamentary democracy has inspired governments across continents. British science, literature, engineering, and legal traditions continue to influence billions of people. Empires eventually disappear. Borders change. Dynasties come to an end. But ideas endure. Perhaps that is England's greatest achievement. Not the lands it conquered, not the wealth it accumulated, but the institutions it built, the ideas it inspired, and the enduring influence it left upon the modern world. Because kingdoms rise, empires fall, but the greatest legacies are measured, not by how much land they rule, but by how deeply they shape the future.